Hey everyone, hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter in whichever fashion you're choosing to play it as. And as we continue to wait for whatever news Capcom is going to provide us regarding the next mainline Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter 6, Monster Hunter World 2, Paradise, Rise 2, naming conventions aside, a lot of discussion has been made regarding what could potentially be more impactful for the player base entirely. Whether it is maybe the addition of a whole new squad of monsters, maybe not necessarily bringing older monsters from the fold that we have seen in previous generations of Monster Hunter games, but maybe adding even more monsters because Rise and Sunbreak ultimately didn't have that many monsters added to it. Or maybe the addition of multiple, not just one, but multiple different brand new weapons added to the game this time around could make much more of an impact. And that's kind of like the discussion topic that I want to have today. Whether you would want the game to have more monsters being added to it, the developers focus entirely more on adding just more monsters, not necessarily such pieces or variants, which of course just reskins of other monsters, but just actual new skeletal types, new monster types, things that we haven't necessarily seen before, or just the flat out addition of just more new weapons to be able to play with, which of course can not necessarily be to your benefit, because if you don't find a weapon to be fun, maybe you don't stick with it and it doesn't really make that much of a difference to you, therefore more monsters would. And that's kind of like the discussion topic that I want to have today, because it was all inspired by an article that I recently saw on Game Rant. Huge shout out to them once again, Devin Ella's friend, big friends of the show that I like to always shout out whenever I talk about one of their articles, where they talk about Monster Hunter needs new monsters more than it needs new weapons. And in this article they talk about it, they give their personal opinions on the fact that they want Monster Hunter to basically focus more on the addition of monsters instead of just adding more weapons. And it kind of gave me a lot of thoughts on my own personal perspective on what I find more valuable. Do I actually want a different mechanics in gameplay? Do I want more exploration aspects to the game? Do I ultimately just care about which monsters it is that I'm fighting? Do I want more difficulty, or do I just want the addition of new weapons? And therefore I kind of thought it was a pretty good discussion topic to be had as a whole. In their article they talk about the Monster Hunter series could benefit from new weapons, but new monsters should be far higher priority for the developers. As the franchise's name implies, Monster Hunter is reliant on having impressive monsters as well as exciting fights. While the game has introduced plenty of iconic monsters to the series, each new game should be looking forward to see what they can add. While it's true that the series as a whole needs to keep evolving, the monsters are the most important piece of the puzzle. The next Monster Hunter needs to keep that in mind regarding its additions. Most quests revolve around capturing or killing monsters in Monster Hunter, which forms the core of the gameplay formula. It is no accident that the story advancements in the game were a result of new monsters showing up. This especially is true for the larger monsters, who will draw players into long-form boss fights that require a lot of skill and strategy to overcome, specifically when the goal is to capture the monster. While there are other types of missions such as item collection, egg gathering, which of course we have been seeing lesser of, the monster hunts themselves are far more numerous and memorable for the games, and I completely agree. Especially as you're making your way from normal mode to hard mode to eventually, of course, master rank, or what we used to call G rank. Just having that constant development growth, new monsters are introduced. Remember that even in Rise and Sunbreak we saw this. Some monsters that weren't appearing in a normal version of like the game, just as an introductory base version of the experience, were introduced in hard mode, and essentially once you got to see more tougher monsters, and eventually of course as you make your way to master rank, even more monsters are introduced. So not every monster has a weaker version of itself. There's always that carrot and a stick approach, where more powerful versions of monsters and new monsters that weren't introduced originally will now be introduced. If I remember correctly, like Nargacuga, for example, was introduced in like, I want to say hard mode, or maybe even just master rank in general. Like, we just didn't see it originally. So therefore that addition of that monster in a higher tier, made a massive difference. Monster Hunter keeps need to creating new monsters. There's a few options that can be taken from Capcom to expand on the Monster Hunter franchise, and the best way to do it is by creating more monsters. At this point, Monster Hunter has several monsters that are synonymous with the series, such as Diablos and Rathian. In fact, Rathalos is so famous that is represented in Monster Hunter as a boss in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. However, the series cannot simply reuse the same monsters without innovating, no matter how successful it may be. Not only that, but the new monsters must noticeably be unique from the entries past. No matter how many memorable or cool monsters there is, players will learn how to fight them. Eventually, defeating major monsters in Monster Hunter is an exciting experience, especially once the player does so for the first time. However, over time, that player will get more used to a monster's mechanics, and as a result, what was once a difficult hunt that can turn to a quite simple one, someone has played for long enough. This is one of the reasons why adding new monsters is so important, since each monster requires some strategy to fight. Introducing more monsters improves the game's longevity by giving players more tactics to learn. And that, I agree with that sentiment, absolutely, but I also think difficulty plays a massive role. You guys heard me talk about how special investigations, for example, were ill-used in Sunbreak at the end of the day. You needed to be level 300 anomaly investigation to unlock it, then be able to do it again, and then basically unlock this high difficulty version of that monster, which sometimes had new skills, new new attack combinations. These were just high difficulty versions of those monsters that I think everyone would have enjoyed to be able to fight, or at the very least attempt to fight, even if they weren't able to succeed in those hunts, but they simply weren't able to because they weren't at the proper level. Those gating tactics probably need to be taken a little bit lowered, made a little bit more accessible to players. While yes, you still may not be able to succeed and finish it, but there was still no guarantee that anomaly investigation hunts were going to be able to keep players entertained. While I do agree with the sentiment that more monsters is always the best way, because new techniques, new abilities, new skills, of course the chase of a new brand new armor set and things like that will keep players engaged. At the end of the day, there is a nice balance between, I think, difficulty and new monster additions, which cannot be disregarded outright. Lastly, in the article, they mentioned that one more reason to introduce new monsters has less to do with the monsters themselves than it does the player. Creating equipment in Monster Hunter games require materials for monsters in question, and each monster has its own pieces of craftable armor. In addition to their stats, each set also provides a distinct look, from the barbarian-like Jagras set to soft and fluffy Lumu set. Adding more monsters would also be a chance to experiment with new looks that could be made in their armor, as expanded monster rosters is not only great for more exciting battles, but character customization options as well, which is absolutely true. Much like how the Pokemon games keep releasing new Pokemon with each main entry, Monster Hunter must keep doing the same with monsters. Whatever comes from the next Monster Hunter, it will probably include a new set of monsters for players to encounter. That's kind of a given. Additional monster benefits from games in multiple ways, creating new fights and outfits for players. Mixing new monsters with the old will do plenty to establish the ecosystem of the next game world. By continuing to make new monsters, the Monster Hunter series will never run out of steam. And while I agree with all of that, at the end of the day, one of the things that this article doesn't necessarily do very well, and it's just a very minor nitpick, is the fact that they don't actually talk about the benefits of additional new weapons. While I agree that, of course, new monsters should be added, I also make the point, and I made this at the top of the video, new skeletal types need to be brought in. I understand the developer spoke about like Yakras, for example, not being a skeletal type that they could be able to bring into Rise and Sunbreak. We presume they're going to be able to get it to work on the next mainline game. They have to. It is a monster that everyone wants to see. But of course, we also ended up seeing that a lot of variants in such species were added into the game because they were just essentially reskinning, recoloring monsters, adding a couple of new changes, elemental types, but not really reworking them from the ground up or anything like that, like we saw in World. And this is something that I think a lot of players will be very happy with, which of course, we expect there to be new monsters. A new flagship will be introduced, a couple of new monsters will be shown off, of course, in the early trailers to get everyone excited. Oh, I can't wait to hunt whatever that new, duck trio looking monster might end up being with 3 heads. Those type of things we should be able to expect. what I don't necessarily agree with is the entire dismissal of a brand new weapon. And this is something that the article, again, didn't necessarily touch upon, because I think the addition of new weapon, this is something that I even touched upon in a previous video where I spoke about 5 different weapon types that I think should be considered by Capcom. At the end of the day, they don't have to add a new weapon, but simply just considering new weapon types would go a long way. This is something that I even talked about with Monster Hunter Now, introducing some basic weapons that I think should be able to make their way, maybe not to the next mainline Monster Hunter game, but maybe the expansion of the next mainline Monster Hunter game. You know, that would probably go a long way. The addition of new weapons brings in new game mechanics, brings in an entirely potential new audience because they see a weapon that looks cool, I want to play as that, and then off we go, right? We haven't necessarily seen that done in the past. I've always talked about like fist weapons, like every Final Fantasy game has fist weapons, but Monster Hunter has dual blades, which are blades, they're actually swords. But what about just fist weapons? Like you actually punch a monster. Like the most basic ideas just simply aren't introduced there. I've never actually read a developer quote why they wouldn't add fist weapons to the game. And then alongside that, they tested out with plenty of things regarding like cannons and stuff like that, and like range weapons, but not necessarily things that are stationary. I spoke about that before in another video as well, like turrets, for example. There's plenty of ideas that they can mess around with, not necessarily maybe even choose to make an entirely new weapon type, but just a new weapon play style that could be added in. These are things that they even messed around with Generations Ultimate, but didn't really nail it all down, because ultimately, if you liked aerial style, that is how you played, regardless of whatever the weapon was, because you didn't care about the DPS that you were outputting. You enjoyed the playstyle that the weapon had. So while I certainly agree that new monsters need to be added in, I think that's kind of like a given, in the same way that I expect there to be, you know, a new story to be added in, of course new characters to be introduced, of course we're going to be exploring a new section of the map. This is something that's been big lately. I've seen a couple of people on social media talking about the most recent Sunbreak book being released in Japan. I've not bought a copy, so I can't necessarily show scans because I've just simply decided not to import it this time around. I might end up buying it later down the road, but I've seen a lot of people talking about, for example, the map of Rise and Sunbreak and how it connects to the actual old world and the new world in its own facet. It's very interesting. A lot of cool discussion being had on social media, on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, regarding all of that. And for me, all of that boils down to you know, they need to give us a brand new area to play in, somewhere in the new world, presumably. Of course, new monsters are going to come with that, a new story. But I wouldn't necessarily want to dismiss the possibility of a new weapon. Maybe something that is going to get everyone excited, or maybe not. Maybe the weapon sucks at the end of the day. But of course, something that gives players something of a little bit of a change that from compared to what we're used to seeing. Understanding though that with the concept of a new weapon, also new balances need to come alongside that. Gun lance, lances, hammer, these weapons that have just simply instant glaive, these weapons that have kind of been left and forgotten. Capcom fully knows that they have been left and forgotten. Simply just rework them or add some things to them to make them more powerful. Make those pokes from lances just twice as powerful, so make people reconsider. Do I want to just do crazy amount of damage with a really slow weapon and maybe not enjoy the gameplay style, but I'm doing crazy numbers? Or, you know, a cool style, you know, a better looking weapon, a faster weapon, a more agile weapon like dual blades or bow, for example, just simply just does less damage, and that's just the way it is, and it changes the meta completely. Again, those are interesting points that I would like to hit up on another video, but I think at the end of the day, adding one of, not necessarily one over the other, but a little bit of both would go a long way. Once again, huge shout out to Game Rat for their awesome article. Devin Ellis' friend, huge shout out to them as well for their article. Monster Hunter needs new monsters more than it needs new weapons. I certainly want to hear your guys' feedback, so do let me know in the comments. But if you're brand new to this video or my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.